My favorite part of it is just the strategic mindset you have to take to get into them. Like people love to say strategic and strategy and all this stuff, right? But like you have to have a plan and it has to be based on research and understanding of the company, what they're doing, how do they make money.
Today's successful revenue leaders once started their careers just like you and I. They faced the challenges that their careers brought to them, they rose to the occasion, and became the leaders that we admire today. Join me as we explore the skills and stories that make a great leader with a pinch of vulnerability. Hello and welcome to Sales Therapy. I'm your host, Alper Yurder. Grab a chair. This is your exclusive invitation to the therapy room, as leaders are going to be sharing their career-defining moments, their secret tips and tricks in their arsenal towards success. And I promise we'll always end on a positive note. Today in the therapy chair, I have Jacob Karp, who leads strategic sales at Rubrik. After over a decade in complex sales, Jacob is an elite seller, and I love following his content around closing complex deals and go-to-market. We'll talk about his success, the joy, the pain, and the journey. Welcome to Sales Therapy, Jacob. How are you feeling today?
I'm doing great, Alper. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Lovely. Me too. Any good therapy starts with childhood and growing up because it shapes the person we are today as a person at work and in life in general, I guess. So can you tell us a little bit about your growing up experience, Jacob?
Yeah, definitely. So I am one of four children. I'm actually the oldest of four. I grew up in a household that went through a couple of different divorces. Great parents, but they didn't necessarily need to be maybe married to each other, they found
Okay.
out. Um, so
Resonate.
yeah, so that was a part of it. And we moved around a little bit. I didn't grow up in the best neighborhood per se. But when I look back, what's interesting now, like as a nearly 40-year-old person, I'm like, that stuff was not easy, but it kind of made me who I am today and instilled a lot of the grit and resilience that I have. So, when you're going through it, maybe you're not thankful for it, but when you look back, you're like, those things made me a better person and who I am today. So,
I love that. Things happen for a reason. And I think generally going through the experience, enjoying the experience is something that starts to finally tick with experience. I don't know if that makes sense.
yeah.
It's finally, by the way, I think we're similar ages. You're 38, right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, I mean, 85? Were you born in 85?
Yep. 85, November
Oh,
of
wow.
85.
Yeah, fellow millennial. Love it.
Yep.
And it starts making sense. How am I gonna enjoy this fucking terrible thing that's happening right now? But then you learn to enjoy it.
Yeah, I think, you make a good point, right? Like I have kids now, I'm married. It's like I didn't understand a lot of the stuff until I got older and like it kind of comes to make sense to you and you understand like the stresses of life, like the things that people go through, and it just kind of shapes your view. Like I didn't grow up in a perfect scenario, but at the same time, I want to do the best for my family, my kids, like the people around me to make life better for them. So it gives you gratitude, right?
Yeah, it does give you gratitude. And I think sometimes because my natural self is not that gratitude person, I try to channel others I know that know well to do it, or friends. I had a friend and we were in a Greek island having an amazing time, but I was still the good old me 3, 4 years ago, and I was anxious about something. Maybe this was during COVID, sabbatical, whatever. And the guy told me, dude, you're good, you're fine, but it feels like every morning you wake up thinking about what to worry today. Like, why do you do that to yourself? He asked me.
You
uh,
know, honestly, I'm very similar to you. Like, it may not always come off that way to people who know me because I can put on a pretty good face of
you
like, hey,
do, yeah.
I'm good. But up here, it's just always spinning. Like, my wife will be like, chilling, doing something. She's like, I can just see that you're over there. Like,
Going,
the
yeah,
wheels are turning. I'm
yeah.
like, yeah, I can't stop it. Like, but what's interesting, right, is like that's some of the stuff that drives you
Oh,
to
yeah.
do better, to always be trying to do more. I think we find a time in our life when we're like, we need to pump the brakes a bit, but it makes us who we are.
Yeah, it does. But I think, I mean, I completely know where you're coming from. I think I had Patrick Trimpe and Angela Mullins. They both said the same things like this, driver personality, success ties to love and affection and all those things. Like, the better you are, the more calculated, not calculated, the more hardworking, the more you achieve. And then you start seeing the rewards of it. And some of the reward is affection and love and etc. But it becomes a little bit difficult when it's overly done. I think not everything has to be conditional. Not everything has to be about achieving. Even if you're just, passing your day for a day, like you should have a free ride and chill and be comfortable and be happy. You should allow yourself to be happy, even if you're not achieving something that day.
I agree. I'm working on that every day. I think, though, to your point, what I find is the days where I do that, where I, kind of separate myself, like put the phone away, put the computer away. It's a Saturday, whatever. You don't have an agenda, you don't have places to be, and
Yeah.
you're just accepting like what's going on and seeing
Oh,
the good.
so hard.
It's rare for people like you and I think, and a lot of people in these professions. But like you realize how important it is, and you're like, I
Yeah.
need to prioritize that.
Oh God, I love the therapy bit of the sales therapy. I think a little more than the sales part of it.
We all need it, man.
Especially because I've been so, I mean, recently I haven't been doing a lot of demos and stuff. That's other people in the business. But obviously, I love the selling and the. But I guess the thing I love about selling, other than the big commission checks, is the relationship building, the conversation, the genuine interest in the others, and all of that. You and I, we talked about this before. Um, I very much admire how you are a very elite seller in your organization right now, like with a decade or more of experience. You're one of the top performers. You coach others, etc., etc. And I think that's a great place to be. That's not necessarily leadership, but that's a senior person people look up to. I don't know. Is that the accurate way of putting what you're up to these days? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I try to think of myself that way for sure. Like the title, I'm still an individual contributor. I'm an AE in my own kind of little world, but I do my best to help people from a coaching
Yeah.
perspective, give them, kind of things that have worked for me. Like we obviously see me do that on LinkedIn, but I'm doing that internally, at Rubric as well. I think what's interesting as you get older is like you don't have to have a certain title to be a
Absolutely.
leader or to be a supporter of your colleagues, your friends, your peers. Like you should be doing that no matter what your title is, right?
And I think those people sometimes in an organization, I used to work in a training company like behavior change and stuff, and there's a lot of good science that goes into it. Sometimes in an organization to make change happen, you don't need to, people don't listen to the manager or the leader or whatever the title person is. They listen to who they see as the one they can trust, the champion, basically. I mean, champion in sales language is different, of course, but it's a champion because people love, respect. They see them as a subject matter expert, ombudsman, whatever you call it. So my career was going in that trajectory. Then I became a leader. Then I became in a startup like the first man after the founder, and then I ended up being the founder.
Yeah.
That's not something I chose, but if I had the choice back then, I think I had decided to be a very senior IC and enjoy that as well. I think it's a very enjoyable position to be in.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, I think I don't know anything about being a founder, but I have like a high level of admiration for it. I think, the IC world is so different, right? Because we kind of like own our own little world. In your role and the things you've done, you've got so many things to think about.
Yeah,
What's beautiful about mine is I get to look at this one little spot and hey, here's the things I need to do. But I think you can the best places I've ever worked are the places where everyone is moving in the same direction, moving together. It doesn't have to be rah rah. Like even from your position as a founder, like it doesn't have to be, and you're probably not like rah rah, right? But it's like, hey, we're all moving towards this one thing. We support each other. We're collaborating.
yeah.
If you
There's
don't
rah
agree,
rah, and then there is rah rah at times. But
yeah.
still, at the end of the day, we're going towards a similar rah rah, I guess.
And what people are looking for from their leadership is people who've been there, done that, right? Like you
Mm,
kind of touched on it. The people you end up looking up to or wanting to spend your time with are like ones that like they've gone through the same fights that I'm
yeah.
going through right now. When they go tell me to do something or ask me to do something, it's because they would do it themselves or they have done it themselves.
I don't know. I went straight into that topic. Generally, the flow is a little softer before I dive into like the realities of the career, etc. But I went there because you and I we had like a few chats before and long ones, and I just love how you own your personal brand in that the senior IC role, but you are currently like helping others to build their pipelines, or grow their deal sizes. And how are you doing that? How is that experience nurturing you also?
Yeah, so I made a little bit of a change this fiscal year in what I'm doing. So previously, I did strategic enterprise sales for 10 years. So I would have 10 to 15 to 20 accounts. I knew everything about them. I did all the deep research, all this stuff. Now I actually am a subject matter expert on one portion of our platform, and I
Mhm.
align to around 10 different AEs. So I get to help them sort of with their overall go to market and accounts as it comes to the portion of the platform that I'm selling. And it's really interesting because I get to collaborate on pipeline generation. I get to run my own campaigns. We're building our own champions together, but also separately. It's just like a really big mindset shift
Yeah.
for me. But going back to what you were talking about earlier, Alper, like it gives me the ability to do some leadership stuff, to do some coaching, but also receive that from people who are in the same seat as me. Because
Mm.
previously it was like my first line sales manager is like telling me, hey, do this, do that, do this. Now I'm going to other reps like me and saying, like, hey, what is the best way to get into this account? Like, where can we find success? What partner is the best one? Who's your champion? Like, it's fun.
The best, I mean, it's a win-win. And I think the best working environment is not, I think some businesses don't allow for this, but where there are like large complex sales, everyone's going after maybe like 10, 20 top accounts. There's so much to learn from each other. Verticals are well defined, so there isn't like conflict of interest and blah blah. Then it becomes amazing. Like invite me to your call, I'll invite you to my call. We'll learn from each other. It's a very psychologically safe environment. I guess not every business has the opportunity to do that, but once you have that ecosystem, I think it's a great place to be a salesperson, because there isn't direct competition. You just really feed each other, isn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing. And like we talked about earlier, it's really everyone kind of on the same page going in one direction. I think what's interesting about it for me is that our jobs as sellers is to build trust with our prospects and customers. In the role that I have today, a lot of my job initially was building trust internally. These
Yeah.
other AEs that I work with, like I want them to trust me and know that when I go into their accounts and have conversations, I'm doing it from a sensible perspective. I'm not doing anything that they wouldn't agree with. So you build trust with your internal champions, and then you build trust with your external champions. In a perfect world, you do it all together, and that's where the wins come across.
Love that. To be honest, today I want to do something a little bit different with you. Like, I collected maybe around 10 questions or so from our actual users, and I added a bit of my own things to it. So I'm
Awesome.
going to go into a bit of a rapid fire situation in a minute,
Yeah.
where I'm going to ask you all about these, like building, allies, internal alignment, external alignment, all these things that you have to do as an elite seller. Somebody gave me this word. I don't know if I even like it, but complex enterprise seller doesn't have the same thing to it. So I'll call you an elite seller, okay?
I'll take
they,
it.
they just gave me that word, and I'm gonna go with that. But
I
before
like
I go
that.
into it, can you maybe summarize your career a little bit? How did you end up in sales?
Yeah.
Yeah, and from there, like how did your career shape up to the moment that you are today?
Yeah, for sure. So I actually I have a journalism degree. I did not start in sales. I started in public relations. I did public relations and strategic media spokesperson stuff for the first 5 years of my career. What happened was I was working at a cable and broadband company. So I was like telling the stories of the company, the products, the services, the solutions, you name it. I was writing them. I was, talking to the news about them. And I realized that like I was actually kind of indirectly selling
Yeah.
already because I was telling those stories, right? And so I had someone approach me in the same industry and said, "Listen, if you'd like to try sales, like you can take all the things you're doing today, you can come to this company that sells into the same arena and you can retell those stories, but you're going to be doing it customer facing with a quota, etc." Now, full disclosure, I didn't know if I really wanted to do that, but the money definitely spoke to me at the time. Like
Mm,
in the PR world, I wasn't making very much money. The upside was financially was much bigger in sales, but I had had a previous negative stigma, like a lot of people used to,
yeah.
about sellers, like used car salesmen. I hate to say that, but like people say that, right?
It
And I
is what
didn't
it
know
is.
if I wanted to try it. Here's what was interesting. Before I took that role, I went inside the company I was working in and I talked to a lot of our sellers. Like I sat down with them, interviewed them, kind of on a personal mission of mine to like understand like how do they operate, integrity, transparency, honesty, like what's their go-to, how do they go to market. And I realized like there's so many good and brilliant people in sales, like that stigma needs to go away. So I decided to make that leap into sales, started in cable and broadband hardware. 10 years later, I'm in software for the last 5 years, and the rest is history, as they say.
How has the last 5 years of software sales been? Have there been highs and lows, ups and downs?
Oh yeah, I mean, the nature of this profession is highs and lows, right? Like I look at these people who are President's Club every year, who are doing 200% of their number every year. Like that is incredible. There are certainly those people out there. I'm not one of them. Like I'm going to be honest. I've had the ups, I've had the downs, I've had the big years, I've had the not so good years. The best part of the last 5 years is two things. One, like the amount of learning that I've been able to do and how I've challenged myself and grown. And then also the people that I've met, both in the companies I've worked for, but also my customers. Like you're not going to get a better experience than being in sales for meeting all of these unique characters that you meet. So,
Yeah, I hear you. Actually, you push me to go into the next section, which is just extracting all the good stuff that you've learned throughout the years. And you are actually sharing your wisdom and preaching some of these things that I really like about, large enterprise sales and how to be a good salesperson. So I'm going to be very direct and ask you a few rapid fire questions on them.
let's do
And
it.
I would love to hear your tips, tricks, best practices, strategies. Maybe like if anyone is trying to accelerate their career and get to those bigger numbers, bigger deals, etc., quickly, like what they should do. Okay, so I'll go with
Yeah.
that in mind. So maybe let's start with these large, complex deals. What's nice and what's not so nice about them? Like that, what are the highs and lows of, you know, bigger deals, complex deals, as opposed to maybe like smaller ticket, high velocity stuff?
Yeah, I think my favorite part of it is just the strategic mindset you have to take to get into them. Like people love to say strategic and strategy and all this stuff, right? But like you have to have a plan and it has to be based on research and understanding of the company, what they're doing, how do they make money, are they worried about are they worried about decreasing cost? Is it risk mitigation? Is it to grow revenue? Like you need to understand the basics of these companies that you're going into because without that, you're probably not going to get in the door because you don't have a POV or hypothesis that supports why you should be there to start.
Mm, mm,
I love that. Remember, like I'm a journalism major. I'm a guy who went to school to learn how to like research things, write stories, come up with compelling narratives. So I use that in everything I do. The things I don't love so much, candidly, like I'm not great with the politics. Like I
mm,
understand the org charts and the hierarchies, and I've got to get this person to be neutral, and this is a detractor. I don't love that because I want to just have very candid and honest conversations.
yeah.
But in sales, like you don't always get the opportunity to do that in the initial stages. Like you have to sort of hold your cards a little closer to your chest, right?
Can you give us some examples of that? That's intriguing. Like
Yeah, I mean,
when do you have to be careful? When do you have to hold your cards to your chest?
yeah, I think early stages, a lot of what you're doing is you're trying to understand like who is a supporter of yours, who's neutral, who's a detractor, who's a potential champion, right? And before you know that, like the information that you share with people,
Yeah.
you need to be kind of cognizant of how that might affect you positively or negatively depending on their stance, right? So it really is a kind of a chess game in the early stages. Like, listen, I firmly believe in being transparent, honest, and doing things with integrity. But you might not share everything when you're not sure how that person's going to take that information
Yeah.
internally and
Yeah.
either use it to support you or use it against you.
Yeah, I love that. And I think in every conversation, something you learn in sales, it teaches you really well is you don't assume things. Like you don't go into a conversation saying like, "Oh, in your situation, this that." Like that can backfire very quick. Instead, asking questions, but not an investigation. Like, what is
Right.
a great discovery in your opinion? And I have my opinions of this, but
Yeah, again, I think you come in with, to your point, you come in with a plan, you come in prepared, you understand some things, you know the questions you want to ask, but it's not like, hey, Alper, I have 17 questions I have to get through in the next 30 minutes. Let's
Oh
go.
God.
You need to start with what I firmly believe in is like a funnel of questions, but
Hmm.
you're not going to use them all. So you're going to have like your high level overarching question of like, thematically, I want to understand this. If you go to a place that you want to learn more about, you kind of ask those second and third level
Yeah.
questions, but it might be that you don't get to where you want to go and you go to the next thing. I will say this to my prospects and customers like, I'm not here to interrogate you. I kind of use that as like breaking the ice, but I really mean it. Like the
Yeah.
last thing I want to do is have someone get on a call with me. And when they get done with the call, they're like, dude, that guy just treated me like it was a
Oh,
hostage
I can't
situation.
even. And I can't even anymore. Like, at the fourth question, I'm like, dude, I know you're very new. This, that. I don't want to break your heart, anything, but let me give you the gift. Like that.
Yeah.
This is how. It's so horrible trying to sell to salespeople because
Right.
like, what's that?
They know the game. So
They,
it's like,
yeah.
you're, yeah. And I think the other thing too, right, is get rid of some of this wording that we see in discovery. What are
Hmm.
your pains? What are your challenges? What
Oh
keeps you
yeah.
up at night? Like, get
Yeah.
rid of that. Have a real conversation of like trying to understand where people are coming from in a real language.
Yeah. I think for you to be able to do that, it's genuine curiosity, interest in others, time, presence. Being comfortable in your own shoes, being confident to ask questions because those questions are helpful. But then when you have a buyer like me who is like been through that and da da da, and you're going through your four questions, and I try to be patient and nice, not to break anybody's heart. But at the fifth question, I'm like, where's this going? You have to give me something before I answer the next question. Hopefully, I'm only 0.1% of the buyers. Hopefully, but still, 1% is quite cruel as well. I've seen cruel people.
But at the same time, I mean, so have I. But at the same time, like you, based on your experience and also your current role as a founder, like you are a savvy buyer, right? Like you've
Hmm.
been through a lot of these conversations and cycles. I think for those of us who have been in the profession for, for me, like 11 plus years, I want the savvy buyers. I want to talk to you
Ah, yeah, yeah.
because you'll get to the point. Like one of the hard things too in enterprise sales is when you're dealing with people who haven't ever made a purchase or are new to evaluating technologies. They're oftentimes too nice. They're willing to let the conversation go on too long. They're willing to take conversations even if they're not really going to make a move. Like
Yeah.
my guess is for you, right away, like, hey, I either want to work with this person in this company or not. And you're
Mm.
going to tell them, hey, this is a thing, or get lost, Jacob. And I love
Mm.
that. I'll take it.
Yeah. I mean, it's the information asymmetry between the buyer and the seller, and like, why do you need the seller? I mean, the seller's job is to. I think it was Andy Paul who introduced me to this concept of making good enough decisions. You're there to help me make good enough decisions. It doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be a decision, and it has to be good enough, which means we don't need to sit for 5 hours answering all these questions, but like maybe you have to ask me the right questions so we get to the answer quickly and all that. um, yeah, but it's hard. It's hard, especially when you're junior. It's you don't have that same acumen. You don't know how to manage that difficult buyer. It's a tough job. Now,
If we went and looked back at my calls early in my career, which thank goodness call recording software didn't exist really back,
yeah, I agree.
it would be horrendous.
Oh
I
yeah.
would probably look like a deer in the headlights. I would probably sound like my voice was shaking
Yeah.
because I didn't have, to your point, the confidence. Like I didn't have the time and seat where you get very comfortable asking those questions and doing them naturally.
Yeah. You more on the practical side of things. Let's talk about like managing client relationships and big deals and etc. So generally in your book, like how many accounts, how many deals, whatever ballpark do you have going on?
Yeah, so this year in this newer role where I'm more of a subject matter expert, like I could potentially be dealing with hundreds of accounts. They're all
That's because you
enterprise.
touch
They're all,
others.
what's that?
That's because you touch others through this.
Right, right. So I align to seven plus reps in all of their accounts, so I can do things in all of those accounts. At any given time, now I may be working 10 plus deals, five of
Mhm.
which are very large. They're either large POCs or they're just large engagements. So a lot of my job now is to understand the prioritization of those different deals, like which ones need more time and resources, which ones need less, which ones have more velocity, which is kind of what's based on the resources, right?
I love that.
And then time management. Like
Yeah.
we talk about this all the time, sellers talk about this all the time. The most elite sellers I've ever met, if you go look at their calendar, it is time blocked to the minute.
Mm.
Like, and they are doing those activities during that time.
Yeah, sticking to doing. I mean, blocking is one thing, and then sticking to doing is another. When you talk about like 5, 10, and really large deals and etc., I it makes me quite excited. Brings me back to the day, and then there's the commission at the end of the quarter, hopefully as well.
It's
So,
good.
how do you manage those multiple big deals? How do you know where to put your attention? What are the signals you look for? Maybe some practical tips on anyone who is new to complex sales or like moving up market. What are the things you've learned over the time? What are your go
Yeah,
strategies?
I think organization and your processes and tools you use are critical. Whether
Hmm.
that's something your company gives you or creating your own things that work for you. Everyone has a CRM. Everyone has some sort of methodology, or most people do. Most companies. We use Medic. I've used Medic forever. People can say what they want about it. It works for me. I understand it. But at the same time, Alper, like I have deal trackers that I've made for myself.
Hmm.
So it's a Google Sheets, an Excel spreadsheet. Maybe it's a tool that we actually have, and I'm tracking all of these things in
What are
like a.
you tracking?
What's that?
What are you tracking on those things?
Like what? Okay, so where are we in the stages? Obviously, what is the compelling event and timeline? Because I
Hmm.
can then go put my stages up against like what I need to do. Paper process, like legal, like do we have an NDA? Do we have legal paperwork going on?
Hmm.
Technical win? Have we technically gotten the approval that yes, we're the right person or company? I'm kind of like all over the place with it, but it's like all of these different things. These are what people, when they go up market, what surprises them often is like, whoa, I'm like a project manager as a
Yeah,
salesperson.
yeah,
Like, I
yeah,
need to know about 10 different things happening in an account at any given time.
yeah. All of that complexity.
Understanding all your stages, understanding like what gets you in and out of a stage, whether you create that for yourself or your company did, like, hey, I have pain, I have champion, I have a champion, like I can exit this stage. Hey, we've got a technical win, I can exit this stage. Hey, the NDA is not done, I'm stuck. I can't move out of this stage until the NDA is done.
Yeah.
So I do it I'm like an old school, I'm doing it in like a Google sheet
You are
that you
very
can.
old school, and I'm cringing inside. I'm like, this is exactly why I'm building Flowla. I should have done you a demo of it in all this time that we've been discussing. But we should get you to be a user definitely because all of these things are why exactly I'm building it.
I know, I'm the use case, man.
Uh, Absolutely. And a lot of people are talking about like multi-threading, like making sure that you bring more broader alignment. In a chat today, I heard like CFO was the person who is now appearing in every deal, and now it's like CIO is also coming in, etc. How do you build consensus with all these different stakeholders? How do you manage that complexity?
Yeah, the multi-threading is key, and I think everything you just said is spot on. For me, it starts with building like a perspective org chart from the beginning.
Mm,
Like I'm before I'm even in an account or before I'm truly in a cycle, I've already constructed what I think the org chart is because I'm already thinking like, hey, if I want to go sell to Alper, like who else do I need to get on board within his organization?
mm,
And have I touched them yet? Am I truly like in a conversation with them?
mm.
So I already have all those targets on the board. I start with my initial team I'm with, building a champion, a coach, whatever. And then I'm socializing those conversations.
Hmm.
So I'm taking, like, if you and I had a conversation
Yeah,
and it went really well, I'm going to already have in mind 3 people I think I should talk to. I'm going to validate that with you to ask, like, hey, who else needs to be involved? Usually it's like this title, this title, this title. In your org, that's these names.
yeah,
You're either going to tell me yes or no, or tell me don't reach out to them.
yeah, yeah.
Candidly, at the end of the day, like my job is to go reach out to those people, unless you explicitly are like, dude, if you reach out to those people, you're dead, right? But like my job is to go try to get in front of those people
Yeah.
because I want to tell them about the great conversation that you and I had
It's,
so that they don't hear about it for the first time when I slide a PO across their desk.
yeah, it's a very, very tricky situation, and you have to be careful. At the same time, you have to do it. Have there been any situations where you thought you were speaking to the champion, but they weren't, or there were hidden stakeholders popping out at the last minute? Like, what do you do to avoid them now that you've become experienced, I guess?
Yeah, in my younger career days and years as a seller, for sure. I had a lot of those blind spots, right?
Mm,
I think what you understand as you go forward, and for those who are like learning and building their career, you should always assume that your champion could potentially not be your champion a day
yeah,
later.
yeah.
So it's always like you'll hear the phrase like trust but verify or trust but validate.
Mm,
And people talk about testing. I don't like that language because like you're not like an AI model, you're not a robot. Like I don't, you're not testing in that way. But you're always trying to understand like, are you really on my side? Are you going to sell on my behalf when I'm not there? And then also like the big thing that I've realized in these big deals, if there are people who are detractors who are against you, who don't want your technology, your job is to try to get them at least to neutral,
yeah,
right? Because
absolutely.
here's what happens, right? Like you and I have a great conversation. Let's pretend you're like, yeah, I want to buy your stuff. And then you push it to this committee in your organization and there's seven other people. If I've never talked to those seven people, they're like, who is this guy and what is this? Or if some of those people do not like me, do not like my product or like my competitor, they might stand up when I'm not there and say, no, we're not doing it because we're using these people. Alper, I'm not doing it because of XYZ.
Yeah.
So there's always people you can be influencing. I think, and I'm on a long-winded rant here, and I'll summarize it here. If you think you've talked to enough people in the org, you probably haven't.
Haven't,
Add
yeah.
one or two.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it's one of the worst things. Like being ghosted as a salesperson, you think everything was going fine, but now, like for a month, you aren't hearing from anybody. You're in the dark. You have only one person to speak to, and they're maybe changing their jobs. You have no idea. Yeah, I mean, honestly, all these things resonate a lot, and what we're building into Flowla now, like you send a flow, it starts beautifully circulating among different people. I think every digital sales room kind of at the basic offers this, but if you haven't tried it, I would highly encourage you to use something like this to um, you know build a few steps into a flow or whatever digital sales room you use. See how people are engaging with that, how much time they're spending, are they looking at your demo? And a lot of times, I think we've done some research into this, and by increasing the number of stakeholders in a flow, by doubling them, you increase your chances of closing a deal by 30 to 35%
Oh yeah,
on any deal that's under 100K. That is actual data that we have from Flowla, because anecdotally, people tell me all the time, like, oh, I thought this person was my champion, but I saw that they were checking my flow only 2 times, whereas somebody else popped out of nowhere, and apparently they're the CFO who was looking at it 14 times. So that
yep.
kind of intent data, if you can get it somehow through products like ours or any other product, I think it really helps chances of
Oh,
closing the deal.
I totally agree. I think what you guys are doing matters in so many ways, and those signals are things that for those of us who may not have some of them, or companies who don't have them, like they need them, right? Because to your point, we have a conversation. I send you something, like I might lose track of what's happening after that, but like what you guys are building and these sort of technologies, it gives you those like, hey, to your point, like Alper only looked at it twice, but the CFO like opens it every day.
Yeah,
They're passing it on to people.
yeah.
Clearly, like it's on their desk and
Those are my best friends.
they're
The ones who
considering.
are opening a flow every day, they are my best friends.
They're the ones that are considering like, what do
Yeah,
I need to do to move this decision forward? And
yeah.
so for if you're a seller and you haven't talked to that CFO, nice little signal to say I should probably reach out to them or have Alper introduce me.
Absolutely, and I think it happens a bit more naturally than trying to creep into people's LinkedIn's and stuff. Um, one question I have around what makes a good salesperson, or actually, I'll be even more personal. What do you think you excel at that makes you a sought after sales leader?
I, it's a great question. Honestly, I think, and I always go back to this: honesty, integrity, transparency. What it really is keeping it real.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I work with you, if I work for you, if you work for me, I'm going to be direct but polite about things. I'm going to keep it real with you, and I do the same with my prospects and customers. At the end of the day, if you came to me as a prospect and customer and told me I don't want to work with you or we don't want to do this, I say, okay, thanks for your time. Like,
Yeah.
I'm here for you if I need you or
Yeah.
if you need me in the future. I think, like, just being a real human.
Mm.
Like, I know that's kind of like a canned generalized answer, but where what happens is for people early in their careers, and I was one of them, you get boxed into these like scripts or like parroting or roboting something
Yeah,
back, and it doesn't resonate with people. Like, just be a real human being and be like, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Cool. If not, I'm here. Hey, if you want to move forward, just let me know. We'll get the resources for you.
yeah.
Like, that's a real conversation,
I
right?
think that that makes a lot of difference. And I'll actually add something, and I've thought about this very thoroughly. I think maybe I will define it as proactive or helpful. And let me elaborate. When you're the kind of salesperson who proactively thinks about potential roadblocks, difficulties, risks, alert the buyer on them, help them, help your champion build that consensus, empower them to be able to sell your thing internally, anticipate things and share that in advance. I think those things for me they stand out. Like when I'm trying to buy and this person's coming like probably you're going to need this or probably somebody's going to object to this. So let me share that with you before you ask me. That is like a perfect salesperson.
It's so funny you say that, and it's an incredible kind of like segue into something. A younger seller who's younger in their career, who I've been helping, they came to me and they're like, "Listen, like we're in a good spot in this deal, but I have this feeling that these C-level folks who I haven't talked to, who I can't get a hold of, are going to come to me with these a ton of objections about why we shouldn't do this."
Yeah.
This person had a champion, middle of the org, like director level. You got the C-level she hasn't talked to. She's like, "What do I do?" I'm like, "Go to your champion and give them every single objection that you think the C-level is going to say, and give
Yeah.
them the answers,
Yeah.
the truthful answers." She did it. She sent it to the director. They talked about the C-level, and it execute the velocity of the deal went super fast after that, because all the things they were worried about proactively was given to them of like, here's why you don't need to worry.
Yeah.
And it's spot on. Like, just make your buyer's life easier by giving them the answers to the test.
Absolutely. Just make their lives easier and then you'll hit better commission checks.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm,
faster, hopefully.
um, on a less talked about topic, which comes up a lot in my conversations lately, actually, and I want to understand your perspective on this. Client relation, blah, blah, that's all good, but internal relations matter, if not as much. Um, at times even more to close a deal. Like, I think you have to have your internal champions. How you work with other teams matters a lot, in my opinion. So how do you build great relations with other stakeholders, like customer success, for example? Or I don't know how your organization works, but like those people who are gonna potentially, onboard the client to the product, handhold them, help them, work on it. How do you work with them, and how do you build good relations?
Yeah, great question. I mean, first off, you should be proactively building those relationships, like whether it's early when you're at an org or even now if you've been somewhere a while. Because the last thing you want to do, right, is go to someone within your org who you've never talked to before and
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
make an ask of them, a big ask of them, right? So, like for people early in their orgs or earlier in their careers, like build those relationships as quickly as possible from day one. The other thing is this: when you are building your internal champions, we just talked about it with your external champions, make their lives easy,
Hmm.
do the work for them,
Yeah.
right? Like, and especially with CS, like, I think it's so critical that sellers get into have good relationships with CS teams, because those are the ones when the seller sells the deal, that's the finish line to some extent, but it's really the beginning of the next part of the journey.
Yeah.
And your CS or PS team, whoever deals with the customer from there, is the one that then represents what you told the customer was going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, in the best scenarios, like you do a fantastic handoff, you are on the calls, you provide all the information of what you sold and told the customer to your CS team. You go on to those first couple calls with CS with the customer, and you're there as the bridge, and you're making sure that there isn't a gap in knowledge or understanding. So the customer isn't like, you told me this was going to happen, and then CS shows up and they don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
And that's not CS's fault if that happens. That's the seller's fault.
Yeah. So you just, already in my next question, what are those frictions between sales and CS in general that you observe, and how do you overcome those? You mentioned communication. I think it's very important, but what else?
Yeah, I think it's communication. I think it's not providing the collateral, right? Like in some of the best orgs I've ever worked in, anything that the seller presented to the customer during the cycle
Hmm.
is given to CS, and then you sit down and you have an internal handoff. Customer isn't in this yet.
Yeah.
Sellers sit down with CS. You talk about what was the deal structure, what were the products, what were the use cases, what are the timelines, like what are the things, the success criteria they have to hit in adoption, so that your CS team goes into it with the same talk track and mindset that you had when you were selling it.
Mm.
Because again, the worst thing you can do is have someone buy something for hundreds of thousands of dollars and their first experience with CS is like, CS doesn't know what's going on, and usually that's on the seller who hasn't communicated it effectively to the CS team.
Yeah, and then it comes back hunting you on your performance review because you're selling fine, but everyone else hates you because you're not involving them in, you're selling something, you're not using the latest and the greatest. And I mean, yours truly, I had those feedbacks in, back in the day, and I'm like, I'm going to sell, and they have to deliver. Like, how terrible and arrogant.
Yeah.
Um, by the way, you mentioned an ideal handoff, which is great. But to me, and something that we're trying to do with Flow, which is like looking at one source of truth every single moment, like one flow, every document shared, every content, every person, it's there. Do you think this handoff thing has to be a one off down the line? Or is it a better way to do it like maybe, feed bits and pieces along the journey as things are getting real?
Yeah. No, I think the latter of what you said, like in the some of the biggest and best deals I've ever done, I've had CS involved in the last 25% of the cycle.
Hmm.
Because when you're going to ask your customer to pay all of this money over 3 to 5 years, whatever it is, like I want my CS team there, one, because it's like comforting to the customer, but I
Yeah.
want them there to speak about exactly what's going to happen the moment
Hmm.
that contract is signed and the moment we start having to deliver value to the
Hmm.
customer.
Hmm.
Because if there's a gap, like I've seen it where people sell a deal and then like a month goes by before CS gets involved. It's like, what? How is this happening? Like
Yeah.
they need to be your partner on the deal before it even closes, both for you, for the company, but also for the customer, right?
Hmm. Do you think then a salesperson has a role in onboarding, customer onboarding as well, or not really?
I think that their role needs to be more internally focused, again, like communicating, providing the right information. And then I think like if you're a salesperson who doesn't isn't on those first customer onboarding calls after you sold the deal, like
Hmm.
you might not have the best that your customer might not have the best experience because they're going to think of you as someone who just sold the deal, got their commission, and pieced out.
Hit and
Like
run,
I
yeah.
want to be there supporting, and especially in enterprise, like the money is made in the expansions, right?
Yeah.
Like the land is important, but like it's the long term LTV and like more money that comes from doing the right things once you sign the deal.
So what can do? I mean, I think this is my last question, and I think it's a very juicy topic. I've seen the best and the worst experiences where CS would be like, "Well, I'm doing all the work, so I should get the commission," and then sales should be like, "I brought in like, what is a new business? What is an expansion?" Um, how do you? I mean, this is a very loaded question to be a final question, but like, how do you avoid those situations? I guess, like, how do you make sure in a team people know their roles well and they're doing the right things? How do you build those boundaries
Yeah,
between those?
that is a juicy one.
It's a
I
bit,
think
it could be a
I
topic
think
on its own.
it's on the company that you work for to
Hmm.
incentivize all the parties correctly,
Hmm.
right? To have clear rules of engagement and lines of how things should work. Now, in a perfect world, the seller can still be compensated for some things. If there's an account manager, they can be compensated. CS, like if you're compensating all of them the right way, then they should theoretically be collaborating and working together on the right things.
Yeah.
I haven't always seen that happen. I'm sure you haven't either. But I think like going back to what you and your team is building, consistency of the way that things happen and communication is key. So like having a flow even just for customer success plus the seller for the customer is so important. It's in one place, it's uniform, it's the same thing they saw over and over. It's not some deck that CS made after the fact
Yeah.
that doesn't have any like trace back to what the
Yeah.
seller sold.
Yes.
So it's incentivizing everybody right, but also like consistency of
Yeah.
communication
Yeah.
deliverables.
Yeah. I think it's transparent, it's visible, and it touches on the point you mentioned in the beginning. It's all about trust. And when there's no trust, when there's no psychological safety, everyone's trying to do their own things, bring things at the last minute. Even the buyer does it. They'll be like, "Oh, your seller told me this,"
Oh
whereas
yeah,
you, as the seller, never told them that. Yeah, we all
that
know it. We've been there.
also comes in, right? Because they're like, yeah, he said that this part of the platform was included. And like,
Yeah, not really. Mm-mm. Yeah. So how do you keep track of that? How do you make sure that everything is aligned without breaking hearts? Basically, like have everything in one place, just one flow to rule them all. That's what we're trying to build.
I know, I like
All
it.
right. This has been a great chat. Thank you very much, Jacob. And are there any closing remarks? Actually, are there any questions that I haven't asked you that I should have asked?
I don't think so, man. Honestly, like I've appreciated the conversation. I think the things that you guys are building and like what we talked about, the way you guys are thinking about it is it's right. Like this is we need to improve some of these things for our buyers if nobody else, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, for the buyer and also for ourselves, I think, yeah. I mean, I always have the buyer in mind, but when you say that, my gut feeling is we also can do a better job to each other as a team working together on a deal to be able to see everything together, look at the same source of truth. Um, somebody, I think in customer success roles, leaders understand this even better. Like we sales first, we see it like stages and processes, and now I'm doing the handoff to you and it's your thing. Even if we have the best intentions, we see it in that way because we have to move on to the next opportunity. But customer success sees it more holistically, I guess. It's like, and the buyer actually sees it as just one flow. They don't have the sales, CS, implementation, whatever. So for the buyer, you just need to give the perfect experience, which is frictionless. They don't care about talking to Jacob. They don't care about talking to Alper, CS. They just want one frictionless experience, and we should strive for that.
It's a really solid point. I completely agree. You sometimes like you brought up something that I forget sometimes. Like your buyer, they don't really care about you. They don't even necessarily care about your product, and they don't care about your process. It's
Yeah,
like, can you help me achieve the outcome I need by
help me.
whatever means necessary?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Help me achieve the outcome I need, whatever it means necessary, within my budget and timeline and constraints I'll have. Wonderful. This has been a great chat, Jacob, and I look forward to having you again on the show. But thank you very much. Any closing remarks before we go?
No, man, I appreciate the time. It was a good conversation. Thanks, Alper.
My pleasure. So that's a wrap on this episode of Sales Therapy. If you enjoy the show, follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Until we speak next time, be good. Bye bye.